The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
Welcome from the General Assembly and the City of Richmond. I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports and Cox Communications. We are honored to have three special guests from the Hampton area here this morning. Delegate Gordon Helsel, representing the 91st District. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Mamie Locke, good to see you again, representing the 2nd Senatorial District.
Thank you.
Senator John Miller, good to see you, sir, again, representing the 1st Senatorial District.
Good to be with you, Woody.
Well, it's been 1 week exactly into this very short 2013 session, so let's dive right in. I know you had a bill that passed subcommittee in the Senate yesterday. Please talk to us about that.
Well, I had a bill that passed dealing with voting, and I think that if you're 65 years old or older, you don't need to have to invent an excuse if you'd like to get an absentee ballot. Seniors face special challenges, and sometimes it's difficult for them to get to the polls. And so for the past 5 years, I've introduced legislation that says if you're 65, you can request an absentee ballot and you don't have to give one of the excuses to get one. And that passed out of committee yesterday and will be on the floor of the Senate soon.
Well, great, and congratulations. I know there are other voting matters, however, and I believe there were a couple of other bills that did not make it out of that subcommittee.
Well, there were some early voting measures that the committee has not seen fit to approve, and next week I will have a bill on creating a bipartisan redistricting commission, which always passes out of the Senate. Passed out of the Senate last year, 40-0. The House takes a different view of who should draw the lines in redistricting, and later this morning I'll be presenting a bill establishing a pilot program in Virginia to establish vote centers. And in an effort to reduce the long lines that we saw in this last election, this would enable some localities that wanted to participate to establish a voting center, which is sort of a super precinct, and they could combine 2 or 3 smaller precincts and let people go to this one central location. It will reduce the costs, it will reduce the number of people that we need to run the elections. And I think it will create increased turnout because it'll be more convenient for people to go to one central location than scattered around a whole bunch of little precincts.
Now, what about absentee voting by email? I understand members of the military who are overseas have an option to vote that way, but others do not.
Yeah, you can request, both people in Virginia and people living overseas or in the military can request an application by email, and the state board will send the application to them by email. But when you get the application and send it back in and you want the ballot, if you're living overseas or in the military, they will send you the ballot by email and you can send it back. But if you live in Virginia, you have to mail your ballot in, and it costs $1.75 to mail that ballot to the constituent, and then you've got to mail it back in. It just makes sense to me to have one system for everybody, that if you want to send your ballot, you can request a ballot by email and you can send it back in by email. It would save the Commonwealth about $1 million in a presidential year. Unfortunately, the Privileges and Elections Committee didn't see the wisdom of that, but it's a technology issue, and the technology is here now, but not widely available to be able to read those ballots if you just print them out on your home printer.
Great. Senator Locke, continuing on the discussion involving voting, one of the applause lines that the governor got in his State of the Commonwealth address related to the automatic restoration of civil rights to nonviolent felons. It had an early demise over on the Senate side, but apparently there's still life, be it life support on the Senate side. Talk to us about that.
The reason why the governor got such a round of applause on this issue is because for many, many years, Democrats have been supporting the automatic restoration of rights. So for the governor to take the position that he did was really remarkable, and we were very surprised and supportive of him taking that position, as well as the Attorney General being supportive of the automatic restoration. In the subcommittee of the Senate yesterday, it barely got the votes to move out of the subcommittee to the full committee for discussion. But I think even with that, there was just some quibbling over language and how that language should read. So there will be work being done on the legislation from the time that it left the committee yesterday until it gets to the full committee to try to satisfy those who had some concerns about the way the language was reading, primarily because there is a definition of what a felony is, but there are no broad definitions of what constitutes a nonviolent felony. So, that kind of got into the weeds. So I think once that kind of language is worked out, it'll have a broader base of support.
Great. Well, keep us apprised of that. And I know you're also working on women's issues on the Senate side. Talk to us a little bit about those issues.
Fortunately, there's not as much of the kind of legislation that surfaced last year that put Virginia on the map for the wrong reasons. But there is legislation that's designed to repeal the ultrasound legislation, which many see, and I certainly see, as an unnecessary medical procedure. There's also an effort to try to bolster the rights of women to make their own choices with their families, with their physician, and with their God. So hopefully, this legislation will be heard in the spirit in which it's being presented, and maybe we can get some more attention to that and the importance of it. But there's still some bills out there that are designed to minimize women's choices, and we will certainly deal with those as they come forward.
Delegate Helsel, I'll give you an opportunity to comment on your colleagues' remarks, but I know that there's a budget amendment regarding Langley Air Force Base that you wanted to highlight for us.
Sir. Yes, sir. Langley Air Force Base, as you know, Woody, is located practically in the middle of my district, and Senator Locke has some of that district as well. The situation is that Langley faces the same issues that Oceana has faced over the last 8-10 years. We are advised that we may very well have some BRAC folks visit in 2014.
That's the BRAC, that's the base relocation.
That's exactly right. And what we're trying to do is be proactive with regard to the encroachment at Langley Air Force Base. In other words, to have the money appropriated and to be able to start buying this land that the Air Force has identified that will not only protect the folks that live in that area, but will also protect the mission of the Air Force. And they're very much concerned about that. $3 million is a lot of money. But we move it to 6 because the city of Hampton has said that they would match that number. So $6 million, according to the Air Force, would do an awful lot for them in resolving this encroachment problem that they have. This is a $2.4 billion a year operation that they pour into the Commonwealth's economy. And I know that Pocosin and York County and Hampton, there are many, many civilian workers from those areas. And not only would the $3 million assist in the encroachment problem, but what it also does is it lets those civilian workers have to take one more worry off of their mind about their job. And so I'm encouraged by what I've heard to this point. I actually sat down with the governor yesterday and we discussed it. I was a little disappointed that in his State of the Commonwealth address he did not mention it, but I had a much better feeling when I left his office yesterday about it. And so, while we've got bills, on the table, it's important that Langley Air Force Base be dealt with. It would turn Hampton Roads into a ghost town, for lack of a better word, if something were to happen to that. So we don't want to be like Oceana and be BRAC'd and then start buying land. We want to be proactive, and when BRAC shows up, if they do, we're already working on the problem that you're concerned about. And so that's probably the highlight of my session While I'm concerned about transportation and education, have some issues with those, that's probably my main charge.
Great. Well, I'm sure you're all concerned, and I'll direct the next question to you about this looming sequestration crisis that will have a very negative impact on Hampton roads and all the military institutions throughout the state. Unfortunately, that's not within your control. That's within the control of members of Congress. But I know the governor announced that he would like the General Assembly to increase a contingency fund in anticipation of that. That would have a real significant negative economic impact throughout the state, and especially in your district.
No question about it, and I think the governor has done exactly the right thing by increasing that by $20 million, as I understand it. Sequestration is coming, I think, and while none of us can do really anything about that, we need to be in we need to ramp up ahead of that, and be ahead of all of that sequestration before it happens. And I think we're going to do that, in particular with Langley Air Force Base.
And of course, Senator Miller, life goes on here in spite of what goes on in Washington, and we want to make sure that children, when they reach the 3rd grade, can actually read at that level. And I know that you've had initiatives a number of years counting in that regard. Talk to us about what's going on with 3rd grade reading levels.
Well, I've been working on 3rd grade reading initiatives for the 6 years that I've been here. And the 3rd grade reading test is the most predictive test we have in school. If a student passes that test, there's a 95% chance they'll pass the 5th grade test and they'll be successful. But if they fail, and 16,000 3rd graders in Virginia fail that test every year.
16,000 every year?
16,000. We only have about an 82% pass rate in Virginia, and that's unacceptable. So if a student fails that test in the 3rd grade, there's a 50% chance they'll fail 5th grade and they'll fail school. So there are 8,000 3rd graders out there on a pathway to prison. And if we just invested some assets at the front end and made sure every child could read in the 3rd grade level at the 3rd grade, we would be saving the $500 million we spend on remedial education every year, the dropout costs, juvenile detention costs, and prison costs. So it just makes sense to me to really focus on 3rd grade reading, and the governor has agreed, and he's had some initiatives the past 2 years to help improve 3rd grade reading. This year, our approach is going to be a pilot program in 16 jurisdictions across the Commonwealth. The Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission did a study at my request, and it was an excellent study, and it's a blueprint for how we can improve 3rd grade reading. One of their recommendations, and it's the only one that doesn't cost any money, it actually saves some money. Virginia is one of only 6 states that give 4 SOL tests to 3rd graders.
Standards of learning.
Standards of learning: reading, math, social studies, and history and science. And these are comprehensive tests. They test knowledge from kindergarten through the 3rd grade. So a 3rd grader in Virginia is tested on more knowledge in the 3rd grade than they'll ever be tested on the rest of their life. So to me, it makes sense, and the study says, let's concentrate on reading and math, the 2 core subjects you need to be successful in school. We test history again in the 4th grade, and we test science again in the 5th grade. We're still going to teach those subjects in the 3rd grade. There just won't be a big SOL test at the end of the year. And the time that we save teaching the test, we can use to improve reading and math skills. And so we're going to take 16 schools, 16 jurisdictions, and some of the schools will have 2 tests in the 3rd grade SOLs, some will have 4, and after 2 years we're going to see if it really does make a difference. I think it will be a game changer, and that we will be able to give our students the very best foundation in reading and math skills so they'll be successful in school.
And Senator Locke, I know you have a great interest in this as an educator yourself, because by the time those kids reach our institutions of higher learning, they have to have a really good foundation.
Right. And I can see the impact, of course, you know, at my level, since I do teach college students, especially as it relates to writing. I mean, it's a skill that students are quickly losing. And I think that that ties to actually reading comprehensively. And being able to concisely digest what one has read and put it to paper. But even more important to me, Woody, is early childhood education is critical. And the sooner we can get children interested in learning, reading on grade level, the better off we'll all be. And if we're going to, tie all of this to an educated, viable workforce, then that's where our investments should be, in early childhood education as well.
And speaking of those investments, Delegate Helsel, that's one of the ways we can ensure that we keep businesses in the state of Virginia, maintain that friendly business environment by investing in our students so that there is the workforce of the future. And I know your community colleges play a great role in that as well.
Community colleges do play a great role in that, and they do a great job. Thomas Jefferson College, of course, is one that is near my district, but not necessarily in my district. And I support, my colleagues here. I was not, Woody, to be honest with you, that knowledgeable about the reading issues in the state. But in talking with John and with Mamie, I've been kind of brought up to speed. And, I have grandchildren now, and one of those will be in the 3rd grade next year. And I certainly do not want my grandchildren to not be able to read on the level that they're supposed to be on at whatever given time. And so it's important. It's important that these children are able to read, to comprehend what they read, and as Mamie said, put it to paper. So I think that's a great great movement with John and Mamie, and I hope they're successful in that. I really do.
And of course, the emphasis on science, technology, engineering, math, and now health is critical these days in expanding the opportunities for our students throughout the state, and I'm sure you're supportive of that, as well as adequately funding all of those institutions.
Absolutely. It won't happen if we don't fund it. I mean, that's the bottom line. When I look at some of the budget that is not quite in form yet, I think we need to be doing more for our teachers. I think we need to be giving them more of an incentive to become more proactive, I guess, in the classroom. I know in my district we have some great schools, and we have great teachers, and we have great students as well. But those folks, can only do so much. They can only do with what funds are given to them, and they seem to shrink on a yearly basis, and I don't think that's a good thing.
And Senator Miller, I believe in his remarks, the governor is pushing a 2% raise for teachers. They haven't had a raise in a number of years.
Well, state employees for several years have not had a raise, but the problem I have with the governor's approach is that is only for SOQ teachers. It's not for all teachers. It's only a small select group of teachers. We need, as Delegate Helsel has said, to raise up the standards for all of our teachers. We keep hearing about, we ought to get our teachers at the national average. Well, we ought to be above the national average. Virginia ought to be a leader in education, and just shooting for the middle is not acceptable. And so we've got to find a way, the education deals with our future. The children are the future of this Commonwealth, and that's where we ought to be focusing our money and our efforts and our talents, to really give them every opportunity to be as successful as they can be.
Now, the Commonwealth continues to maintain its AAA bond rating. It's still noted as one of the more friendly states for businesses to locate, but we still have a huge transportation problem.
We have a crisis in transportation.
And I know that there are a number of proposals floating around, but the governor's proposal would for the first time by any state eliminate the gas tax and put more emphasis on raising revenues through the sales tax. Where are you on that issue?
Well, I applaud the governor for putting out a fairly serious proposal. In the past, there's been, he's floated the idea of offshore oil drilling to finance transportation, selling the ABC stores. We pulled out the credit card a couple of years ago. And so this, I think, in a realistic way, has got us all talking. Here's my problem. The gas tax is going away in probably about 20 years because cars will be more efficient, or they'll be electric or run on biofuel or something like that. So the gas tax has been decreasing, so we're going to have to deal with that, but I don't think eliminating it today is the right approach. Secondly, we need at least $1 billion to fix the maintenance problem and the construction problem.
That's maintenance only.
Yep, and we need at least $1 billion, and we're only going to do this once. I mean, the General Assembly's not going to come back year after year, and so we need, as they say in Washington, a big deal, a grand bargain, and the governor's plan is short of that $1 billion mark. And a third of his revenue, he is relying on Congress to pass a law that they have been unwilling to pass for a decade, which would tax internet sales. And that money, a third of that, of his revenue comes from that revenue stream. I've worked in the United States Senate. If you hadn't passed the bill in 10 years, there's not much likelihood you're going to turn around and pass it anytime soon. So I'm not as optimistic as the governor that source of revenue is going to exist. So we've got to find a dedicated, sustainable, realistic source of revenue. I think we ought to take a little bit of money from the general fund. We ought to raise the gas tax. 68% of my constituents say raise the gas tax 10 cents. That would give you $500 million right there if you did that. And if you did some other things like tolls and a little bit of money from the general fund, you could get to $1 billion. But there are several plans floating around, and I'm hoping that at the end of the session, we will take the best from all the plans and find a solution finally to transportation.
Senator Locke, what about some of these public-private partnerships that have grown up over the past few years? I believe there's one relating to your area in Hampton Roads that has caused a little bit of discussion.
Just a little bit of concern, and primarily because you're striking a deal where citizens are going to have to pay for this over the course of the next 58 years. And, it becomes difficult to place the burden of transportation on Virginians alone. That Virginians are not the only ones using the roads and using the bridges and the tunnels. And in our area, to get from one place to the next, you either are crossing a bridge or you're going through a tunnel. And so that places an undue burden on residents of that area. And also, as it relates to the transportation plans that are floating out there now, a major concern I have, and I've always had, is how much revenue has been taken from the general fund to fund transportation. Because when you take from the general fund, you're also taking from public safety, you're taking from public education, you're taking from higher education, and there's only so much revenue to go around. And even if you increase the sales tax, you're still, diminishing the amount of revenue that's going to go to these other entities. And quite frankly, what we need is a sustainable source of revenue for transportation.
And Delegate Helsel, tell us a little bit about the kinds of traffic issues that exist in the Hampton Roads area. Northern Virginia gets a lot of publicity about traffic congestion there, but I know it's just as bad where you live.
It's extremely bad. Probably the two worst choke points that I'm aware of, at least, Woody, would be the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, and then, of course, I-64 headed toward Richmond as it drops from 4 lanes, or actually 5 lanes, to 2 lanes. The problem, I'm not sure that I've got a lot of problems with what the governor wants to do. I admire him for what he's put out there, and I know he's put in a lot of time and effort for it. But my concern is, number one, with the gas tax, I just don't want people thinking that because it was mentioned that we're going to do away with the gas tax, that they pull up to the pump and their gas is reduced 17.5 cents.
Very good point.
That is not the case, and I am afraid that, and it's certainly incumbent upon us to make sure that message gets to the district, that July 1, don't think that your gas tax, your gas will drop by 17.5 cents. That's just not going to happen. So I think there's a carrot out there that kind of needs to be withdrawn. The other issue and I've met with Secretary Connaughton yesterday about this, and what I need to see, Woody, to really bring me on board, I've got to find out, what does it do for the 91st District? What does it do for the people that I represent? After all, that's where my loyalty is. And how much of that money is going to projects that benefit the peninsula? And I think our problems are as severe as Northern Virginia, or as severe as the South Side. And I don't think that we have been the recipients of the same amounts of money with respect to the projects that are done on the south side and what's being done on the peninsula. So those are my hang-ups. I'm hoping somebody can put that in a form that I can understand and my constituents can understand. So, and there are several plans out there, so we've got a lot of work to do.
Great. We've got about 3 minutes remaining, but I want to make sure you all have the opportunity to comment on two issues. One is the potential for lifting the moratorium on uranium mining, and the other one, which is very important to people of little means, is the potential for expanding Medicaid coverage in the state. I'll start with you, Senator Miller.
Well, I'll take the Medicaid one. I think it's essential that we expand Medicaid. We have 400,000 Virginians, and many of them are children without proper health care coverage. And we have the opportunity. The federal government's going to pay 100% of the cost for the first 3 years. And then after that, it steps down to about 90% of the cost. But even with that amount of cost to Virginia, the jobs that are created and the revenue and taxes that are created from that job will more than offset what it costs for that amount of coverage. So I think it's essential that we move forward and we cover Virginians and give them health care coverage.
Senator Locke.
I absolutely agree with that, because we pay one way or the other, for the uninsured, who end up in emergency rooms when their illnesses are at their most chronic stage. So we end up paying for that anyway. So Medicaid expansion is extremely important. And as for uranium mining, that's a discussion that's going to be ongoing this entire session, because you have good messages on both sides of the discussion. So I think that at the end it'll depend on who gives the best argument.
Great. Delegate Helsel, sir.
Yes, sir. I agree with my colleagues regarding the Medicaid issue, and it just so happens that the Medicaid issue deals with folks that really can't help themselves, and we ought to have a special place for those kinds of folks. And so we need to try to expand it as much as we can to make sure those folks are covered, and that they're able to live in the same type of peace that we live in. Those of us who have health insurance and are able to go to doctors and hospitals and those kinds of things without all the flack that comes with it. With regard to uranium mining, I have had probably 75 folks in my office since last week, and they are actually from the Pennsylvania County area, and they are just wildly supportive of lifting the moratorium, and maybe the message is not out there like it should be, but if lifting the moratorium doesn't start cranes and bulldozers moving.
I'm going to have to cut you off.
Yes,
I'm sorry,
sir.
they're telling me.
That's okay.
Thank you for being here,
Yes,
the three of you, Delegate Helsel, Senator Locke, Senator Miller. Thank you for watching Cable Reports. I'm Woody Evans. See you next time.
Mm-hmm.